Welcome to the Father on Purpose podcast, a show designed to help dads disciple their children. It's for fathers who don't just want to raise children, but lead them in a way that honors Jesus. It's a place where you might discover, for the first time, that you're not a father on accident, which makes you, of course, a father on purpose. To help guide us on that journey are our hosts, Kent Evans and Lawson Brown. Kent's a husband, a dad, an author, and the co-founder of Manhood Journey. Lawson's a husband, a father, a military veteran, and business executive. He believes that if he just keeps trying, one day he'll get Kent to have a coherent train of thought. Good luck with that. As you listen, we hope you'll find biblical ideas, practical tips, and even have some fun along the journey. Every single dad is a disciple maker. The only question? Discipling them. How? To where? Let's discover that together. As we dive in, remember, you are not a father on accident, so go be a father on purpose. Welcome aboard.
Hey, Dad, sometimes we can help our kids avoid needless mistakes, right? As the saying goes, we can help them see around corners. However, how we do this matters big time, and it's important that we make our input winsome and acceptable, not dictatorial or harsh. Sometimes you can be right, but still not be very influential. So today, on today's show, we're going to show you some nuances and throw out some ideas for how to help your children see around corners and how to maybe not trip the wire as you're doing that so that you can be both helpful and influential. Before we dive all the way in, remember, today's show is brought to you by Range Leather. You can go to rangeleather.com and get amazing products. USA made, assembled right here in the good old US of A in Laramie, Wyoming. Bags, belts, Apple Watch bands, folios, wallets, a brand new business card holder, brand new wallet style they have. Go check out rangeleather.com. And if you find something that you like, use the code MJ15 and get 15% off your order. Thanks to our friends at rangeleather.com.
Who I just opened up a bag of Range coffee.
Wow.
Well, actually a box, and inside it were 2 bags of Range coffee. And I'm super excited. It's a little late in the day to go make coffee right now, but tomorrow morning, baby. Haha, I can't wait.
Let's go. Yeah, I had their delicious Rwanda a couple weeks ago, and man, it was fantastic. They also have, if you ever get out to Laramie, you can see Range Leather right in front of you. And then if you point your right arm at like 1 o'clock on the dial, you're going to see Range Coffee right next door. You can sit there and have a cup of coffee
so good.
And watch them make your Apple Watch band. Well, maybe not yours. I don't know if you can like order one up. Like you can say, I'll have a latte and Apple Watch band. Like, I don't think that's how it works. You go tell me. You go to Laramie, Wyoming. Tell me how the ordering process works and then come back. Leave us a note at manhoodjourney.org. Before we dive all the way in, I want to also remind you, Dad, we have a brand new report coming out called The State of Biblical Fatherhood. We're going to do a whole show on it. I think that show will drop next week. But right now, you can go to manhoodjourney.org/SOBF, as in Frank, State of Biblical Fatherhood. Or you can just type in State of Biblical Fatherhood into probably ChatGPT or Google, and it's probably already out there. Great report on what dads are doing in every area of their life: prayer, finances, volunteering. Go snag it today. On today's show, Lawson, let's talk about helping our kids see around corners, and kind of the backdrop for our outline today will be one very specific chapter in the Bible. If you want, Dad, if you're at a place where you're not driving, like don't do this if you're driving, but if you're sitting there listening to this show and you can go grab your Bible or your Bible app, go to Proverbs chapter 7. Proverbs 7. We're going to kind of bounce through that and let Solomon give us some wisdom on how to approach these topics. But like, you've raised 2 daughters, they're in their 20s now. Tell me a little bit, Lawson, of just sort of when you saw today's show title and you thought about some of those times when you helped Olivia or Abigail see around a corner or process something that maybe you had some experience with. But, you didn't want to just come at her with the, I got experience and you don't stick. Because that, every dad listening knows if you got teenage kids and that's how you open,
right.
You'll be in that you may be correct category, but you may not be influential category. So tell me a little bit about how this show's topic lands with you and your experience.
Yeah. And depending on the kid, sometimes the right thing to do is say the opposite, and then they'll do what you actually wanted them to do. Little reverse psychology. Yeah. And I also had to go look up, Kent, winsome. Aren't you? Look
Winsome.
at you using the word winsome, which I honestly did not know what it was. It says, well, what you said was, let's come across in a way that is winsome, which means, I just found out, attractive or appealing. So good word, my man.
Why, thank you.
Yeah.
I think the word winsome is in and of itself kind of winsome.
Oh my gosh. You know what? Here's what here you asked me in reference to the girls and just being a dad, being in some men's groups over whatever the years, seeing around corners. Like, I get it and I love that. I think that's a great premise. If you have a good relationship and are engaging in a way that is trusted, I think that's a good place to start. But I also kind of imagine, like, I'm a visual guy, so helping your children to be able to see around corners might actually come later. And what I picture visually is like, we dads, in a lot of cases, have been around the corner. We've seen around the other side. Now we come back and we're kind of like describing what
I am from the future.
Right. Like, we come back from around the corner and go, okay, so I've been around this corner before. Let me, tell you kind of what my experience was. But really, the first thing before you start going down a road of trying to be a fortune teller for their own life is where are you in your relationship? Are you in a position to be heard? And are you with them on this journey in a way that, they trust what you're saying and they want your input? The best thing is when your kid comes to you and says, hey, can I ask you something? And then they bring up a situation. Oh my goodness. When the girls would do that, it's like, wow, that good for you as you're maturing a little bit, maybe not trying to be just so independent. And then, as a parent, I remember, watching a couple times. They weren't about to like get seriously hurt, but we've told them, hey, don't pull on that lamp cord. It's going to fall over. And then, they're 3 years old, 4 years old, and maybe a little stubborn and want to pull it and even look at you dead in the eye after you tell them not to do something and pull on it and like whack right on top of the head. You go, yep, that's why I said don't pull on that. Yeah. And over time though, when your credibility as a dad is recognized, what we're after, I think, is this two-way dialogue, not a preaching at someone or talking at them. It's a conversation with them.
Man, and what's interesting is in the age of when we're recording this is 2025. In the last 5 or 10 years, with the rise of social media, there's never been a time in history when it was easier to just speak at people instead of speaking with people, right? Like, just go on social media and just bark and just say things.
Right.
You don't even have to be accurate. You don't have to be kind. You just get your idea out there. There's a proverb, I can't put my finger on it, but it said, a fool delights in sharing his own opinion. And if you just go scroll through a lot of social media, you're going to find a lot of fools, right? And that's a temptation as a dad or even a mom, is that we're just going to share our own opinion. I've said what I needed to say. I got it off my chest. There's my 2 cents. Well, you can say what you want to say and not be very influential. There's a proverb, Proverbs 22:11. It says, he who loves purity of heart and whose speech is gracious will have the king as his friend. I like that verse. It's not about currying favor or being manipulative or sweet talking your way to the top. What it is about is for the people who are intelligent, for the people who have responsibility, for the people who have command over a situation or have to think, gracious speech is going to open more doors than it closes. And I think sometimes as parents, as dads, we can forget that. And we just start in. You know your problem? You know, what would happen? What would happen? You're sitting in your office. You're sitting in your cube. And your boss comes around the corner with a coffee in hand. And he goes, you know your problem, Lawson? I mean, like, how receptive?
Yeah.
Other than just, you're going to choke it down because it's your boss and you can't afford to get fired right now? Okay. But if he goes, hey, Lawson, I've been observing something and I think I have an idea that can help you.
Mm-hmm.
Now, he's going to tell you the same thing next, right? You know your problem? But the way he starts or she starts keeps your guard down, and he'll have the king as his friend. You will be, What we also note is the whole book of Proverbs is a big letter written in different pieces and parts, of course, but a big letter from, for the most part, Solomon to his son and sons ostensibly. So if you read Proverbs 1:1, the Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel, to know wisdom, to receive instruction, to give prudence to the simple, let the wise hear, to understand. Then he says in verse 8, chapter 1, hear, my son, your father's instruction. And you can find that phrase often in Proverbs, something like, I'm entreating you. I'm not begging in a subservient way, but I'm asking you to listen to me. And that's where he starts off Proverbs chapter 7. He starts with, my son, my son. And so after just 2 words, as I'm teaching from Proverbs chapter 7, and we did this through a blog post, I would stop there and just go, hey, Solomon's instruction in chapter 7 is going to be this kind of instruction that is quite literally to see around a corner. Like he actually mentions corners in chapter 7 in a very compelling way. We're going to help someone see around corners. Where do we start? With a relationship. With a relationship. If I were to take my Bible and go open it up and just start walking up to people in the mall and go, hey, excuse me, do you know you're headed for destruction? Okay, if God tells me to, I'll go do it. However, what I know is not many people are going to warm up to that. Why? Because I'm being brash, I'm being arrogant, I'm making a lot of assumptions, and I don't have a relationship to trade on. Yeah.
Right. Like the guy on the corner with the bullhorn, just yelling out at people that, and another thing that Solomon teaches repeatedly is engaging with people through story. I think it's interesting how much more receptive I am when someone that maybe I seek it or maybe they're offering it proactively, when they come with like a bulleted point lesson and maybe haven't engaged in what's happening with me in the moment or that week or something like that. If you just start off with, let me impart on you these lessons, right. Versus, back to what we were talking about when our kids are in need of some advice, or maybe they're seeking it, or you see something and you feel compelled to kind of step in to say, hey, in fact, this happened just last week for me, or hey, when I was your age, or I remember this time when I was going into middle school and a bully was there, or I was tempted, by, fill in the blank, whatever. Leading with real life story and engaging them in a way that is winsome, if I may steal your word.
Yes, you'll notice in the dictionary that word says copyright Kent Evans. Yes, that's because everyone associates that with me. I am so winsome. Okay, right. I know my wife just probably busted out laughing on her elliptical at the YMCA. Sorry, honey.
Right. But story, what happens when you're listening to a story is you're identifying. You're trying to find where am I in that story, or who would I be in that story? And so without explicitly describing it, you're leading them through that story for them to identify with it, latch onto the lesson, maybe even participate in that lesson, and ask them, is that kind of maybe what you're going through? Is that something that you see in your life? Is that what's happening with that guy that is trying to get your attention and you're maybe not sure of? Is that what you're thinking? And so it's an interactive storytelling / question answer session that helps them think through and apply in their situation versus, hey son, come have a seat. Okay, so you've checked off that box of establishing the relationship. He's not doing that. He is engaging from the start by saying, you're my son. I love you. I have some things to offer you to live by, and some laws to remind us of that are going to help in a situation that I can see coming. Like let's peek around this corner and let me offer you some glimpses of what happened to me when this was happening. So story, I think, is the way to engage.
Well, what's interesting is if you look at this chapter 7 of Proverbs has 27 verses in it. And if you look at the first 5 verses, it's basically, I summarize, Solomon going, hey, please listen to me. Please listen to me. I have something to share with you that's very important. That's kind of verse 1 through 5. Then verse 6 through 23 is all a story. It's all a story. He tees it up. Well, I'll come back.
Yeah.
Then the last 4 verses are all direct consequence about the story made applicable to that young man he's talking to. So if you think of it almost like bookends, at the front end of the story of the chapter, 5 verses going, please listen to me. At the last 4 verses of the chapter is Solomon saying, now here's what happens to the guy in this story. Don't be the guy in this story. And then in the middle, these middle, 17 or so verses are this story. And the way Solomon tees it up, it's as if he saw this actually happen. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. I'm not debating that he didn't, but I'm saying you could tell this same kind of story, right? So for example, he goes in verse 6 at the pivot, and he says, for at the window of my house, I have looked out through my lattice, and I've seen among the simple. I've perceived among the youths, a young man lacking sense. So watch this. He's going to have this guy in the story, the non-hero. What's that called? Like the antagonist of the story. Well, the adulterous woman is probably the antagonist. The sucker, the bad, the one who loses in this story, because it does not have a good ending. This is not a Hollywood movie, right? It ends very badly for this guy. He's going to have this guy be kind of set up as this straw dog that he's going to knock down. He's going to say, watch, I've noticed there's this guy out on the street, and he has no sense. This guy cannot think for himself. And here's what happens to him. Then later he's going to go, hey, don't be that guy. You know what's super, super interesting to me about this that I just found fascinating, and I only realized this very recently. We all know who Solomon's dad was, King David. There was a time when King David was on the roof of his house, and he looked down and saw this attractive woman. And then we've got this whole story about the very bad things that befell David, his ultimate son who didn't live, the Uriah who he had murdered essentially. All this stuff happens. And then you've got David's son telling this quote unquote story. And what I find super interesting about this is in the Proverbs chapter 7, Solomon is like playing the role of Nathan the prophet. It's rather than tell, hey boy, you're headed on a wrong path, my friend. And if you keep going down this path, you're going to end up in jail. Instead of pointing his finger at his kid and kind of communicating that way, Solomon tells this story and says, hey, don't be the fool in the story. That sounds just like what Nathan said to David. When Nathan came in and said, David, let's say there's this guy and he's traveling and he needs to make a meal. Instead of killing all, and David goes, oh, that guy's crazy. And Nathan goes, guess what? It's you. You're the fool. You're the...
Right.
And I just find it so interesting that here we are one generation removed, and Solomon, with his own kids, is kind of using the same technique, if you will, that Nathan the prophet used with his own father.
Yeah, that's so wild. And,
Isn't that wild?
And what a twist there that really woke him up. Like it was such a mental jarring, like that made him realize and see clearly those consequences for himself, for his marriage, for the kingdom. Like, wow, man, that's I'm glad we kind of ran down this road on Proverbs 7. And there are, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, or you can either do it like Solomon did it, or you can do it like Chris Farley did it. And you can just tell these kids, you're going to be living in a van down by the river. Like, it's the same basic model, right? Let me tell you where you're going to end up. Let me show you a picture where you're going to end up. Here's what I want to reinforce for the dad listening. Well, you and I always talk, Lawson, behind the scenes about, we want three things to be true of our podcast pretty commonly. One is that it's biblical. The second is that it's fun. We have a good time. Third is that it's practical.
Practical, right?
Dad, if you start with experience and years and age, pick those battles very, very carefully.
Yeah.
Instead, start with relationship. Hey, buddy, I want to share something with you. And I want to tell you what I've seen and what I've seen happen. And here's what can happen. As opposed to saying, if you keep this up, I know exactly what your future holds. I'm not God. And frankly, I want a little wiggle room in case it accidentally works out. I used to tell Alex, our son who produces this show, he'll probably crack up when he hears this story, but there was a phrase I used to use all the time when he was a kid. Force is not the answer. And so he would try to fix something. And if it wasn't being fixed with a little bit of handwork, it was going to get a hammer or it was going to get slammed or banged. And so he heard, I'm sure, 100 times, force is not the answer. And so about 3 or 4 years ago, we were doing something together. It was at a holiday or something, and we couldn't get something to work right. And he goes, oh, and it worked. We both started cracking up laughing. And he goes, Dad, it's not true. Force was the answer. And it's so true that at one time, but 99 times out of 100, I was probably going to be right. But I want a little wiggle room, right? So notice what Solomon says here. He says, hey, I've looked and behold, here's what happens. This is what tends to happen. Your case might be different. Maybe you can go down to the adulterous woman's house and hang out with her while she tries to actively seduce you into her home. Maybe. Yep. I mean, best of luck with that. However, for the most part, here's what happens. And if you can adopt that posture as a dad, then I'm going to give you what I've seen and I'm going to tell you what's likely to happen. Then you're not quite the arrogant fortune teller because they'll just turn you off if you go that route.
Yeah, that's the practical application lesson right there is and the more times that your kid sees, he actually kind of predicted that. He helped me think through and look ahead, and definitely he was right, and him and mom got together and kind of we all talk it through, and I'm glad that happened because sure enough, that's what was about to happen. That's what unfolded, and I avoided it. And so that happens often enough, they begin to trust even more and seek that advice, and God does that for us dads. He's offering us his advice. And when we listen and when we follow, it's more times than not, we're going to be reinforced that he is with us, that he is in control, and that he does love our family even more than we do. And he's got our best interests in all things. I want to talk about helping, maybe not in a cut and dry kind of black and white situation, where there is a problem being presented. We've experienced it multiple times, and so we've got that dad advantage. But maybe it's a subtle problem. Maybe it's a subtle brewing of something that is, maybe it's somewhat confusing for us. It's something that we didn't have as a kid or a young adult or a newly married, because times have changed since then, and there are things today that we didn't deal with back then. But the point that I want to kind of hone in on here is I think it's universal, and I think it's not constrained by time, and that is when we can help identify something that is subtle in the form of, like Proverbs 7, temptation. That my point is that temptation usually, a lot of times, starts slowly and almost unrecognizable.
Yeah.
And we don't realize that the small action or the small temptation that we take leads to something, leads around a corner. That you get around that corner and you go farther down that path and then go, yikes, I am really wrapped up in this. How did I get so far down? And like, we need men in our lives, and we need wives in our lives, and other people that are kind of, as the dad, checking us as well, going on this journey with us, and can say, hey, how long have you been doing that? Or how, what do you tell me about what's going on with this thing? And kind of help, like when you're driving down the road and it's a little drizzly and your lights are on and you come around a curve and you hit your bright lights, it's like, oh, wow, that really opened things up. That opened my eyes more. Sometimes we can do that for our children. And I think temptation is like that darkness where you go and turn on a lamp or turn on a light or shine that flashlight, and then it clears up, and you can start to see, like, ooh, I'm glad you did that, because I didn't realize I was standing in a 1/4 inch of water, and now I look over and I see it's coming from over there, and had you not shown me that, before I know it, I'm going to be knee deep in this. And that is something I think practically as a dad, we can, from our experience, offer our children. Now, probably less so in younger kids, but I'm talking like some of the things that teenagers struggle with, social media wise, or in a school that's teaching something that, does it sounds right, but sort of doesn't pass the sniff test, but like, let's dig in on some of those things. And so before you know it, you've maybe unrooted something that was the beginning of pornography or greed, or the temptation, of a young girl to compare herself repeatedly and too much to these images that are coming through, you name the media source, but our world of constant comparison and what did they have that I don't, that is a slow bleed temptation.
That's right.
That if we can help build a filter, in front of, or a wall around our kids to help consume information or consume certain things coming at them in digestible amounts, they're not overwhelmed quickly. And as a dad, we can help them see that by slowly turning on the lights or talking them through it and helping them realize what it is they might be getting into. If go back in time for this Proverbs 7, Bathsheba was a temptation from a distance that turned into a reality because he slowly moved his way there. And before he knows it, when he was like you described, shaken awake by the being told the story and then going, no, that's you. Think if he could have gone back in time and been told, this is what is coming. And had he bought into it, probably wouldn't have, but you know what I'm saying?
It's like that with a lot of leaders, because they surround themselves with people who don't feel like they can say what's really going on. So like, I won't harp on the story of David and Bathsheba, but what I would say is, I would bet a fair amount of money that wasn't the first time he'd ever noticed her. In other words, he looks out of he knows where she lives. He knows his best friend, one of his mighty men, Uriah the Hittite, lived in that house. You mean to tell me the king of Israel doesn't know where one of his mighty men lives if he can look over and see his roof? Give me a break. I know all my neighbors' names, right? And I'm not the king of my city. Come on. He knew what he was looking for, right? David didn't just accidentally trip across Bathsheba. And so earlier in that mental development is where that could have been arrested, right? Look at what happens in Proverbs chapter 7, verse 12. Now in the street, now in the market. So she's moving around. This adulteress is literally moving around, stalking this young man. She's predatory. And at every corner, she lies in wait. There's the word corner, right? At every corner, she lies in wait. We've all seen those, movies about the military, I assume are relatively accurate in one sense. You got the drone flying overhead that is providing eyes on the ground of what's going on. And then you got, comms in the ear of the dudes on the ground, and the guy in the drone is saying, "Hey man, up ahead, two blocks to the right, there's your mark." And these guys have, they are armed and dangerous, and so there's like eyes in the sky that can see down, and they're telling the military personnel where to go, where to not go, where danger lurks. And
great
that's
analogy.
what Solomon is doing, right? That's what Solomon's doing. He's going, "Look, man, I'm up here." He physically is describing a story where he has a vantage point. He has a vantage point. "For at the window of my house, I have looked out through my lattice." Like, bro, I'm upstairs. I'm on the second or third floor of my house, and I can look down and I can see this fool walking toward this predatory adulteress. And so here's the big problem for me with chapter 7 of Proverbs is, if we read it only for the adulteress of, several thousand BC, we don't do the math. And so what we've got to help our kids understand is, what's the adulteress these days? Now, it may be literally an adulteress. Like, there may be a predatory boy or girl who's like after our son or daughter in a way that's unhealthy. That may be true. However, to the point you were making a minute ago, Lawson, it's often a lot more subtle. So, for example, one of the adulteresses in our day and age is, no offense if this is where you work or this is what you do for a living, but would be like social media algorithms. These things are trained to give us content that have a certain vibe and a certain feel to them. And even if you don't quite feed that animal, it's still going to know things about you, right? It's going to know you're a 35-year-old guy who has a wife and 2 young kids, and so you're going to get the ad for Disney, whatever, right? They got ways of figuring out some things about you. They're going to offer you things that aren't necessarily evil, but are targeted. These are targeted ads and targeted content. If you think your news feed is full of random assortment of articles, man, where you been, right? Where you been? So in one sense, social media is a giant city with a million corners, and around all those corners are lurking content that at best seeks to entertain and distract us. At worst, is designed to get us to go deeper and deeper into illicit, immoral, or aberrant behavior. And so for us, we got to help our kids understand the landscape of the digital world, because man, there's a million corners, baby, and there's an adulteress around a lot of them. And I don't mean it just in sexual context. I mean like just distraction, where you spend your money, whether you eat fatty foods. There's like lots of ways that we can be pulled in. And so back in the day, Solomon could describe, a 3-dimensional world with 3-dimensional people around 3-dimensional corners. We've got to be more alert and more aware of where are all those corners, because a lot of them are digital, a lot of them are hidden, a lot of them are very, very sneaky.
Subtle, yeah. So maybe we wrap this up, and I want to just throw something out and see what your take is on this. And we're talking about consequences. That it is not just us trying to help our children avoid getting into something they can't get out of, or getting into something that results in something bad happening to them or punishment. It's about growth. It's about growing and evolving and learning. And sometimes I have found myself too, I'm not exempt from this either, but there are times when I give myself too much grace, either in advance or afterwards, because I blame it on something else, or I bring into the picture the concept that it wasn't really my fault. It wasn't all mine.
Right.
This happened to me. It didn't happen with me, with my consent. More often than not, it is with my consent. And there are times when, okay, whatever, you're sitting at a red light and somebody just rear ends you. You had nothing to do with it. It's not at all your fault.
Right.
But then there are other times where, you run off the road because you're looking at your phone. And it was, shut
up, Lawson. Quit talking about me. I told you my issues are off limits.
Exactly. We all, gosh, I need to put it in the trunk and lock it up. But like a subtle 1 degree off will have you running off the road, and so I guess what I'm wondering about, and just kind of throwing out to the dads, is the consequences are sometimes useful. Punishment can correct, but it's really about growing and evolving and learning and using example after example after example to help, so that when we aren't around, our children can predict what's around the corner themselves. So us as dads help prepare, help reinforce, and instruct through our own experiences, the experiences of other people in our lives, and through counsel that includes God's word and the stories of the Bible that are applicable today, all the time, every time. And there is a useful outcome that comes from that, and that is that our children grow in their faith and confidence, not in us as dads who have been there, done that, but in trusting that God is in control. God has got their back and has got their best at all times. And so I think them becoming not self-reliant, not relying on us, but relying on Him is kind of the ultimate end point.
Well, and what's super interesting about this story that Solomon tells is at the end, he clarifies these consequences. So, and I'll come back to, because you just made a great point, Lawson, I want to kind of double click on. Verse 24, he says, "And now, O sons, listen to me and be attentive to the words of my mouth." If you go back a few verses, here's what he's referring back to, right? Verse 22, "All at once, he follows her as an ox goes to the slaughter." So it's not like, gets a little inconvenient. No, he goes, listen, this is basically an ox going to the slaughter, or a stag, a deer caught fast till an arrow pierces its liver. I mean, like, can you imagine this story at like bedtime for like this 7-year-old kid? Hey kids, gather around. I'm going to tell you a little story. Here's what happens at the end. This deer and then this arrow goes right through his liver. Or he says, as a bird rushes into a snare, he does not know it will cost him his life. So he's not going, hey man, listen, you can try that stock investment, but you're probably going to lose $500. It's not quite that simple. It's like, no, man, you're going to lose your life. Later, he compares her house to Hades, to hell. He literally says her house is the way to Sheol, the underworld. He says going down to the chambers of death. So
not really mincing words.
No. And it's not like, again, it's not a Hollywood movie where he goes, and in the end, he gets forgiven and they all hug it out. That's not how it works. No, in the end, he basically goes to death and hell. That's the end of this story. So let me help you with it. And so what I find super interesting about that is, number one, for the dad who wants to just kind of like quick summary, root your counsel in relationship. Start with relationship. Don't just start with your own smarts or your past experience. Start in relationship. If you can, tell a story. Tell a story. That'd be great. It could be your own story, could be a story of someone you've witnessed. I got a zillion, right? I got stories for every occasion these days because I'm getting old. And I've seen a lot of people do a lot of dumb things. A lot of them are named Kent Evans. And so I got tons of stories, right? Then offer wise counsel. I love this verse, okay? James 3:17 says, the wisdom from above. So if I'm conveying wisdom and I've gotten it from God, is first pure. So the wisdom is not mixed with my own politics. It's not mixed with my own preferences. It's not mixed with my own trauma. No. The wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy, good fruits, impartial, and sincere. So if you want to know, hey, I got to talk to my teenage daughter about some choices that I see her making that I think are leading her to a bad place. I want to help her see around corners. Is what you're about to say to her pure, peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy, full of good fruit, impartial, and sincere? I count 8 characteristics in just one verse of wisdom. Sometimes we get advice confused with wisdom. It may sometimes be the same.
Interesting.
But it's not always the same, right? It's always the same. Wisdom is going to have characteristics about it. And the question we got to ask is, are we offering? It's this idea of like, I'm a butler and I'm offering you the wisdom on a silver platter that you can take it or you cannot take it. I'm not shoving it at you, like a boxing glove in your face. And then finally, clarify the possible consequences. Clarify the possible consequences. Don't mince words. If you believe the road that your son or daughter may be on could end up at a bad place, you owe it to them to at least express that's what you have seen. I've seen this happen a lot of times. You may be the exception to the rule. If you're not the exception to the rule, then let me tell you how 3 of my friends, how this fared for them, how this ended up for them. So Dad, you owe it to not be rude or harsh or arrogant or cocky or like you're a fortune teller and can see the future. But at the same time, you're trying to be the drone flying overhead, helping your son or daughter see around corners. And when you do it right, you'll find yourself both correct and wise, and also, bonus, heard and influential. Join us next week because we've got a power-packed episode ready for you. I believe, if I got my math right, on the state of biblical fatherhood. Can't wait to talk about it.
Good stuff. See you soon.
Hey, Dad, guess what? Today's episode does not get produced for free. We have some costs around here, and aside from our amazing sponsors, we have a group of people who help share that burden, and they're called the Fatherhood Guard. You can join the Fatherhood Guard and be a monthly supporter of our ministry and this podcast. What do you get for that? Well, first, the joy of supporting a ministry like Manhood Journey. Secondly, you help animate things around here. You get cool merch. You get sneak previews. You're part of the insider club at Manhood Journey when you join the Fatherhood Guard. Would you consider doing that? Head over to manhoodjourney.org and you can join today. Secondly, consider sharing this episode with somebody you know. There's a pretty good chance that someone you trust shared this show with you in the past. Now, there are men around you who trust you. It might be your brother-in-law, your friend, your pastor. You know somebody who would benefit from today's episode who's a dad that needs to be encouraged. Share this show with them today. And remember, as you go, you are not a father on accident, so go be a father on purpose. Do not put that in the end notes, Alex. That is off limits.